Now, if we move across to page 7 in the camera setup page, you can see digital image stabilization currently set to off. If I set that to on, you'll notice that the image behind, if you look kind of behind the menus, you can see it's punching in very slightly. It's not a huge amount, but you do lose some of the frame because the digital image stabilization essentially moves the image within that frame, just like post stabilization would do in your editing package. There are a couple of different modes. The standard mode I find works very, very well. However, if you have a lens with built-in image stabilization on the lens, which this one does, if I come out of the menu and turn my image stabilization on the lens. So this is the 24-70 RF 2.8, and it has, unlike its EF cousin, it has a image stabilization on the lens. So if I turn that on, you can see the little symbol that appears on the left-hand side there, a little sort of like handshake, and you'll see that there's a little video camera, and then there's two bars. One of them's white, one of them's hollow. That's telling me that I've got one of two levels of image stabilization active, and I'm essentially using the optical image stabilization of the lens and the digital image stabilization together. If I set the digital IS mode to high, you can see that the two little bars there are now both white, and that's showing me I've now got the highest level of digital image stabilization applied in combination with the optical image stabilization in the lens. They're working together because it's an RF lens. It's actually able to communicate back to the body, and they're working together in tandem, which gives you the maximum kind of image stabilization impact. Now, there are people who hate digital image stabilization. I always did, and it was only when I started using it, I think probably the C500 Mark II, when that new image stabilization system was introduced. Then it then came to the 300 Mark III, the C70, and now the R5C. I've grown to like that, but there are certain caveats. I certainly wouldn't use it and be panning and tracking objects like that. You do get a nasty digital kind of kick in the back of the frame, particularly if there's separation between your subject and its background. But if I'm just trying to hold it still and I want it to look like it's a locked off shot, this is incredible. It's mind-blowing how good it is. You know, I've done shots where I've kind of done reveals. You know, maybe there's a foreground object and my subject's further away, and I kind of reveal, so I'm essentially doing a slide but handheld. With the optical image stabilization and the digital IS on as well, you can achieve shots like that and you just wouldn't know it wasn't on a slide. It's very, very clever because it's essentially a linear change. Now, if I'm doing a kind of thing I might do on a gimbal where I'm kind of moving and orbiting at the same time, that it doesn't like. You may as well turn the digital IS off in that case. So you kind of learn where it works well and where it doesn't work well. But it's certainly better than I think a lot of people realise who haven't tried it. So yeah, there's our digital settings there. There's also in here your options for anamorphic correction. If you're using an anamorphic lens and you want to apply a squeeze factor there, you can choose those options there. But these are the digital ones. Now there's also a lens focal length option. If you're using a non-RF lens, it won't know the focal length of that lens. So you can tell it the focal length of the lens to optimize the digital image stabilization. And that, I think, is where this is another kind of big bonus of the digital IS is you might have a vintage lens, you might have a third-party lens, could be anything really that has neither built-in optical image stabilization or even a way of communicating to the body what it is, but you can tell it what focal length that lens is, and it will do a pretty good job of then correcting that using the digital IS. So I do think there are definitely times and places where this is a really valuable addition to the tool set that you would otherwise potentially just not think of using for operating the R5C, which is after all a small camera, kind of lends itself to handheld use.